Hi everyone. On the property podcast today this week, we've got Neil from Reapit. I've got some 5 interesting questions for him. But before we do that, introduce yourself, Neil, and tell the listeners who you are and what you've been up to.
Well, I suppose if I do my intro as Dr. Neil Cobbold, that tells a little bit of what I've been up to. I decided while at the same time trying to operate within proptech and property, I also wanted to take on a doctorate, which I'm not sure was the brightest move I've ever made. But it's over now. I'm on the other side. I can use the title, and it does make for some interesting conversations within the property sector. But for my background, I've been in property for about 30 years. I've started out on dealing with small independent agency, working my way up, did some social housing, and now for a lot of people in the property work on the dark side on the proptech. I come up through the payment side with PayProp, but now I'm firmly entrenched in Reapit, covering as our methods everything under one roof.
Like it. And we are going to talk both sales and lettings today, Neil.
Yeah.
To begin with, I want to start on the sales side. So there's no movement from the Bank of England yesterday on interest rates, and there's a bit of a log jam in transaction process because of the stamp duty deadline. Are we in danger of a spring drop off in sales, do you think?
We could talk ourselves into anything within this industry, and we love to think that there are these cliff edges coming and it's too good for a reason. There were never no economic forecast said that this month we were expecting a cut in rates. I was at a meeting where we had a representative from the Bank of England, Rob Elder, and they are still predicting 2, definitely, possibly 3, but 2 cuts. But that's going to mean nothing. And yes, do I think that rather than paying to the government, people will have tried to have done it early and to beat the stamp duty? Yes, because if it can be in my pocket or it can be in the government's pocket, the choice is always going to be ours. However, let's look, what's the average house price now in the UK? I think across it is generally we're about the 270k mark. So not much to still get above the 250, which hasn't changed post the 1st of April. That's it. The difference is this 2% that's now been added from 125 to now up to the 250,000, which is going to cost somebody 2,500 extra in stamp duty. And as we know, for most people actually coming up, that's rolled into their mortgage. But even at a 5.5% locked in rate on a mortgage, that extra 2.5 over the course of, say, a 25-year mortgage is going to cost them 6,000. Is that really, in over a 25-year period, going to stop somebody buying a house or yes to buying a house? That's where I think the have we seen a rapid start to the year? Yes, because that's the choice of if somebody told me I can keep this money or not. But if I really need this house and I've found this house, that extra 6,000 over the course of a 25-year mortgage is not going to be dependent on whether I take that property or not. I don't think that's going to be the value decision that's going to cause it. And the same I'm asked, at what point do these deductions really start to be an impetus for first-time buyers? And I don't think interest rates are the mover that's needed. Again, when you look at those between 0.5% and 0.25% differences to what they're going to feel out within a fixed rate, that doesn't help it with a first-time buyer. It's always going to come down to what can you get help regarding that initial deposit? And we need some true 95% first-time buyer options out there. And I think that is what will stimulate the market. I don't think it's going to come down to small macro adjustments that your first-time buyer is going to be looking at.
No, I agree with you, Neil. I think 100% on the main thing is obviously the deposit that you require, to get to that point, is the main thing, right? If you're talking, let's say it comes down, as you said, likely another two rate drops, it's not going to make that much of a huge significant difference in the grand scheme of things when you've got thousands and thousands of deposit that you need to get.
I mean, if we then start to nail in onto certain areas, I do think things like that play more of a factor within London.
Hmm.
just because of the values that we're playing there.
Yes.
Again, I don't think that SDLT will be it, but we're reaching affordability ceilings
Yes.
that really start to cause issues. And that is something that I don't think anybody's addressed. Whether we look at the changes that Rachel Reeves is trying to do regarding mortgages and getting everybody
Mm.
down to Downing Street this week to try and hammer out what we can do regarding making it more accessible, or down to the changes that people are bringing in with leasehold reform and things like that, they still don't come down to the fundamental issue of affordability ceilings. So that doesn't matter whether you're looking at
Mm.
sales or lettings. There are quite a number of locations in London, in around the UK, where we're already seeing that we're going above those affordability ceilings.
Yep. Do you think, you said about the likely two rate drops this year, do you think one of them could potentially be in May?
So that is the current estimation, is that the first 0.25% rate cut will be in May.
Mm.
And that's going to come down to where we see things play out economically. Don't pay too much of on where we are on inflation, because we're going to see a slight spike on inflation because there's some things that are catching up that happened last year that we're still to see play out. But long-term view from the Bank of England is that we will still, by the end of the year, be at our 2.5%, still on a downward trend. Although we may
Mm.
see it start to tick up nearer towards kind of the 3.5s and 4 at certain points during the year. They're not worried about that. They're looking at long term.
Mm.
But I think it's going to come down to this economic driver. And I think the big, worry at the moment that's kind of asking questions is how these tariff impositions could affect that. Because everything that's been built in didn't plan on Trump coming in and laying these tariffs and charges
Mm.
onto the exports and what that might mean. But there are some short-term positives as well as negatives. Things like it's not great for necessarily our manufacturing industry, which we've got a little less of,
Mm.
but I know that we're being flooded by cheap resources that can no longer effectively get into the US. So suddenly there are resource materials. Now we've seen resource materials and things like that we need for house building.
Mm.
Some of those have gone really skyrocketed since the pandemic. Things like copper piping for us to be able to uh, run our gas and boiler piping has gone up considerably. And so, if we are flooded with cheap sources of some of these materials because they can no longer access, we may see a small balance in that it helps us with
Mm.
some of our short-term goals. So I think there's too much up in the air for
Yes.
anybody, even the economists, to say, do you know what, May, definitely we'll get a rate cut. Everything is saying the hedging the bets would be May, but we're just going to have to wait and see how these tariffs play out.
Great answer, Neil. I want to talk on the letting side for a second now.
Yeah.
So, so there's some interesting stuff, but specifically on the renters' rights bill, it's now in the Lords Committee stage and will soon be enacted. We've seen a lot of opposition. Is this just an anti-landlord legislation? What's your view?
No, it's not anti-landlord. And I think the let's go in and break it down, because there's a number of things that I see within our industry. Look, is it a change? 100%. Will we have to change how we act? No, no choice about it. Will there be some things that we need to look at on our charging models and how we survive as an industry? Yes. Is this the end of our industry and is this anti-landlord and gone? No. PRTs, the removal of Section 21s, has happened in
Mm.
Scotland. It's had its hiccups, it's had its issues. They had the same worries. People are going to start using it for short-term lets. People will come in and they won't pay because we can't get them out. None of that has happened. None of that has
Mm.
materialized. We've got to remember that the large majority of our tenancies perform well, go well, and end well. It is a minority that we deal with. Unfortunately, nobody wants to tell all of their MPs and all of their agents and all of the news about the thousands of tenants that work well and the thousands of landlords that are doing a fantastic position out of it. The only ones that make the news are these bad ones. So there's a perception out there of the industry. But if we then break it down, so the courts need to be sorted out. But the courts need to be sorted out now. I got people that have applied for a Section 21, which were worried about it going, who have been given dates for their court appearance 10 months later. And this is about an accelerated mandatory setup. So
Mm.
I think even without this, there is something needs to be done within the MOJ to kind of assist. And I know they're looking at it and they're looking at funding and they're looking at tribunals, but that needs to be sorted whether we were having this reform or not. Then there are people out there saying, yeah, but we can't take the rent in advance. Yeah, it's it's problematic to our current process. But in actual fact, it's a worsening of 3 weeks is the position. And I would say the MOJ and the worsening position and the lack of bailiffs and High Court enforcement officers is a bigger risk than the fact of, is a tenant going to effectively give me 6 weeks worth of money and then not give me 3 weeks before they actually move and take possession of the property? The likelihood that there are tenants out there that are willing to go through referencing and move and set up and move their families and go into a property having paid you 6 weeks to not pay you three, I don't think in reality is going to materialize. I think it's one of these worries that is actually it's an edge case worry that as an industry we're not going to experience. In the same way, everybody's looking at the decent home standards and AWAB's law. These need to be in properties.
Mm.
But for majority of agents who are holding landlords accountable and looking after their tenants, they won't see an issue. And to be honest, the landlords that we can't get to do the work, we want them to have some kind of stick that they can be beaten with, I suppose, is the phrase. Although, please
Good.
don't take that to mean I physically want you to go and beat the landlords. There are there are ways and means that we can actually go and do this enforcement. Physical abuse is not actually going to be one of them. But when we look at it, there are things that need to be changed. The way the Housing Act was set up in 1988, we're in a different world now. We're in the advent of AI. I think everybody's got onto that buzzword, but forget AI. The way that we operate now, the way that we consume, the way that we view our property, the way that we live in our properties, you know, working from home, not needing to be out everything during the day, our needs of properties have changed. And we
Yep.
must expect that a government that is doing its job will change that legislation to match. Now, there are always going to be arguments that have they done it the right way, but they're trying to do it. And that previously it was a reform bill, and now this is a renters' rights bill. And I think that's a key change in the words. This is about strengthening the rights of tenants, not about strengthening the rights of agents. And I've had some talking to me, yeah, but this is going to make it harder for me to let to some groups of tenants. The government's view is that's not, as an industry, our problem. As
Mm.
human beings, we might want to do that, but as an agency, as a business, our primary objective is to make a profit. If they are still allowing us a group of tenants that we can lend that property to and make a profit, then the dynamics of that and what that will happen to society, that is the government's job. And that is for them to deal with. We need to continue to perform and to do our duties. And I still think this bill allows us to do that. There'll be problems. Some lawyers will make some fantastic money challenging things in courts, as happens with any new legislation. But I think post this coming in, which I think will probably be around October time, that's the deadline. It may get in for September, depending on what our transition period is. I think we may get that so that Matthew Pennycook can go to conference season and say done. That'd be a great one to get in front of the parties with. But whether they can do that in time frame for the Lords is what we're still waiting to see. But I think once we get in and we've passed this in 6 months, we'll have different processes. We'll have different ways. We may even have different checks. We may have a different tenant profile that we're largely letting to, but we'll still have landlords. We'll still have private rented sector and we'll still have agents. If anything, agents will be more needed. The biggest growth now, the largest letting agent in the whole of the UK is actually open rent for landlords self-serving. But actually, a lot of the compliance and the need for the increase in civil penalties in the enforcement that's been given to local authorities, I think actually changes that the need for a qualified property expert professional to protect your process is going to be needed more than ever, because they're quite draconian, some of these, in some instances, you could say, but where we've had this affecting people's health and we've had deaths caused by non-adherence to it, you can see why they've perhaps felt they've got to get quite draconian with it. But those can be levied against a landlord, against an agent. Civil penalties now can be issued. Rent repayment orders are going to be up to 2 years since the offence took place, and they're up to 2 years. Now, the other thing to just be aware on there is if a rent repayment order is requested from a first tier tribunal for an offence of which the landlord and agent has already been prosecuted for, then the first tier tribunal must award the maximum amount. That is what they've actually written in there. So if you've been done for that breach and the tenant decides to go for a rent repayment order, they will get 2 years worth of money back. So now the need to make sure you are protected at every stage becomes vitally important. And that's where an agent's going to be. It's not just going to be the transaction on that letting side. They're not coming to us for a transaction, access to tenants. Social media and things have given them, an open rent have given them access to that. What they're coming to us for is that compliance and security. As a landlord, I want peace of mind that I'm not going to have somebody coming after me for tens of thousands of pounds or a possible prison sentence because I've not looked after my property or my tenancy correctly. And I think that is really what is going to change.
Thanks, Neil. On the renters' right bill, it isn't the only sort of bugbear for landlords. We've seen an increase in licensing, additional tax burdens, extra expenditure needed for tougher MEES regulations. Do you think it's all too much for the PRS? What's your view?
I think that property is and always will be a good investment, that for us within the UK, we like to invest in bricks and mortar. And I don't think societally that is going to change anytime soon. We've still got lots of new buy-to-let landlords via more modern methods of sale like auctions entering the market. It is still seen to be attractive. I think, if anything, the balancing of other types of investment and increasing things like capital gains tax, which they did in the October budget, actually stepped up and made property still attractive. But we've got to look at the fact we've got the oldest and poorest maintained housing stock in the whole of Europe. Something has to be done about that. Whether it's being done correctly is always the question. We have issues with, the time frames, access to installers, the fact that Ed Miliband comes out and says we've got to reach EPCC by 2030, and then we have a MEES consultation and an EPC reform consultation. You almost feel that they should have taken place before you come out and tell the industry. Otherwise, what am I actually getting my property ready for? In Wales, we had the same happen, and then they came out and said, we'll do the funding for owner occupiers first. We'll look at funding for these changes for the private rented sector later. All that does is put an inertia. And we've had the same in Scotland with the heating energies bill. We've seen that inertia where there were actually lots of landlords making changes to meet what they believed to be the guidelines. The moment those guidelines look to shift, all it does is it stops those good landlords able to make those changes.
I fully agree with you, Neil. And with kind of the move towards a more professionalization of the PRS, higher standards, more regulations, the last government tried to do it too. What can agents do against this more rigorous landscape? How can they equip themselves for the future?
Well, look, I think for a lot of agents, it'll be business as usual. There are a huge proportion of our agents that already make sure that the people in their business are aware of the regulations and are equipped to carry out the job that the consumer is expecting them to do. And that's all this, when we talk about professionalization, that's all we're talking about. We're talking about mandating and making these set of standards not instead of something that I experience in only a few agents, but something that I can expect across the whole breadth of the industry that I engage with. That being said, although Labour have agreed to bring in the regulation of agents, they're primarily looking at the moment at managing agents. And I'm part of a working group where we're trying to get some information in front, because what we've heard, and again, it's the rumor mill, it's the jungle drums, and within politics, they are worse than the ones within property. So you definitely take it with a pinch of salt, is that there may be a move within government to regulate managing
Mm,
agents. And in the same way, we're finding with the AML legislation, actually bring in the wider property market, estate agents and letting agents in by an increase in scope. Now, that's okay, but what a managing agent needs, their regulations, their qualifications, is hugely different to what we need within the other areas of the property sector. So how that's built in, what that regulator looks like, how that level is set. Now, if they just state that a managing agent must have the relevant qualifications to an Ofqual level 3, then they could bring that in. They could widen that and say an estate agent and letting agent must also have the relevant qualification to an Ofqual level 3. If they say you must have this relevant training that's specific to a managing agent, then it becomes more difficult for them to roll in the other areas. But it's certainly at the moment, with all the leasehold and common hold reform and the questions around the cladding issue that's still hanging over everybody's heads, I certainly think managing agents, once they've done the renters' rights bill and they believe that tenants in the short term and homelessness has had something done to affect it, and we need to wait to see how that plays out, I think their focus will largely be on the managing agents, and
mm.
it'll be on that sector and regarding the leasehold reform. Could we see towards the end of this parliamentary term them refocus it back and start looking at something for agents? Possibly, but certainly I don't see that in the short term that an agent is going to have to be prepared for. That being said, I don't think anybody should be working in this industry without being properly
Mm.
educated and understanding what they're doing. If you now, as a letting agent, post the renters' rights bill, are also subject to those same fines, in large instance, most of the penalties now being raised to 7,000 first offence, 40,000 for repeat or serious offenders. I wouldn't want anybody working in my business not knowing how to
Mm.
navigate that framework and me potentially as a business being levied with those fines.
And I think that's fair comment, and I think that's uh, savvy on on the agent's part to be a part of that, to make sure that that stuff doesn't happen. And I said in my introduction, Neil, I had 5 questions, right? So this is
Yeah.
my final one, and it wouldn't be right if I didn't ask you a tech, question from the agent side of things. It would just be wrong. So I was making sure that we had one of those in. So the things like employment's right bill, minimum wage, national insurance, those things that are obviously still happening. Um, are agents investing significantly enough in technology to compensate for the things that are happening within the marketplace? What are you seeing?
I mean, that's a very loaded question, because as a prop tech company, you are largely going to say they are never investing enough, because we'd always want to see bigger, faster, better adoption. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, though. I think particularly, let's go back to that first question, that how the industry is feeling that there is a slump coming. Then actually, do I now, with this increased sales activity, actually, do I increase staff and deal with the increase that we've got in
Yes.
national insurance, or do I leverage automation? I think we've also got the issue that we've had a great buzzword AI that I talked about
Hmm.
earlier that's been thrown at our industry at countless meetings and events, and people talk about the advent of AI. I think as the industry, we are now reaching the point where don't tell me AI is coming and changing what I can do. Give me the practical applications and show me what that means for my service, for my ultimate users, for my uh, consumer. And we're seeing that with the avatar services that are now being developed that will allow you to actually triage incoming calls. There, there is a lot of work to be done around property and nuanced different to where it's being leveraged in, say, something like a financial community. For the banking, there are limited transactions that I might be contacting that I need a bank to assist me with. So actually, that large language model and how it interacts, it's quite easy to frame. But actually, not only what they are asking, but the way that they're asking it could largely lead to different situations or the seriousness of a problem when dealing with property. So I think that although people are going to be bringing things to the market, we've still got to see a lot of that play out. When it comes to integrated partners into a business, I do think that at the moment there is, how do I do what I currently do, but use tech to deliver it in a more efficient way?
Mm.
I think with everything that we've discussed on this, what we need people is almost to go back to the drawing board. Ignore what you've previously done. We've got the biggest change in 30 years about to hit the lettings market. We've got changes to leasehold reform. We've got new things coming in on energy standards. We've had the new TA6 now come out of consultation regarding what's got to be done for sales. And even though that's not required by law, it is becoming more common. We've got people bringing in and starting to use reservation agreements in England. I think we're going to see a lot of change, and wanting to do what I currently do and allowing tech to deliver it in a more efficient way is quite a limited way of looking at it. I think we almost need to look at what is the process I am looking to offer to my end consumer. What is the best way under this changing framework to deliver that? And what tech can I bring in that takes the heavy lifting out of that change? And then how do I deploy the stuff I've got for the services that a human being is always going to be needed for and to be that? So I don't need them for that transaction. I need them for the knowledge and the overlay they're going to put into that to be able to double check what that tech is actually doing. And you can't just say, I do this as a process, automate this form for me, because it may be how that form is collected, how it's then delivered to it. Does that even need to then be delivered to your human being in the office, or are they the secondary site and overseer of it? And actually, it's a fully automated system now that removes it needing to be dealt with in your office. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that. And I think the gathering of things for material information, yeah, okay, I can gather it and it can be put in my CRM and I can then post it up and be part of my adverts. But why should it need to be that? Could it not be that from the first gathering, I've got tech partners that go and get all of that information because it's stored digitally somewhere, that it's brought down and it's automatically placed into my adverts without it ever needing to be touched by the people that I use within my office? And I think
Mm.
that kind of transformative change can be very scary. For some of our larger agencies, it can be very costly, but I certainly think over the next 5 to 10 years, that's where I see we're going to change. We're going to see more consolidation. So we're going to see those bigger agents. We're going to see that people become more heavily tech reliant. And so we're going to need to change the way that our processes run. And I think we're going to see that, we've got a whole new generation that have a phone but don't want to talk. And the idea that even an AI bot, it's a prescribed conversation that I control the outcomes and where it goes. They prefer to actually a human being where I don't know where this conversation may go. So I think we're going to see a more standardization of some of these processes. And how quick that happens will never be quick enough for the tech industry, but will always be too fast for the property sector. So it's the balance of that that I think we've got to find so that the consumer, which, let's look at this, everything that we've talked about, whether it's the changes, what the government putting in, it's all about how do we make sure our end consumer, our vendors, our buyers, our landlords, our tenants, that they get the best experience and they feel that we're a valued industry. That should always be the lens that we look through any of this at. Not, I'm a tech company, please use my tech. If it's not performing those functions, then it's not right to use. And the
Mm.
same for an agent. Protecting your income is ultimately what you're doing as a business. And the best way to do that is to make sure that your buyers, your vendors, your landlords, your tenants get 100%, not only the best service, but the right service for what they're looking to achieve.
I think as long as you always think about the end user, whatever you call it, consumer, whoever it is, as long as you're always thinking about them, you're not going to go far wrong. So, Neil, I think that's a fantastic way to end the show, end the podcast. And I just want to say it's always a pleasure to speak with you. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and thank you for bringing so much knowledge, insight, and for sharing that with the listeners. So I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. My pleasure, Lee. Thanks.